Hi there, and welcome to video 32 of the Flipped History series. This video is on the October Crisis. The first learning intention of this video is to indicate the demands made by the FLQ, and the success criteria is that you can indicate the demands made by the FLQ. The second learning intention is to indicate the methods used by the FLQ, and the success criteria is that you can indicate those methods. The third learning intention is to indicate the reaction of the governments of Quebec and Canada, and the success criteria is that you can indicate the reaction of the governments of Canada and Quebec. And the final learning intention is to evaluate the reaction of the government of Canada, and the success criteria is that you can evaluate the reaction of the government of Canada. The Front de Libération du Québec, or the FLQ, was a terrorist organization that was determined to separate Quebec from Canada by using violent means. They began their bombing campaign in 1963. Some of their targets included the Federal Tax Building, Montreal's Central Railway Station, Canadian National Railway tracks, and one of the bombs was discovered just prior to Prime Minister John Diefenbaker's train going by. They also struck military and RCMP locations in around Montreal. In 1963, they killed a night watchman at a recruiting station. They funded their terrorist activities by robbing credit unions and banks. They also robbed military armories in the province of Quebec, where they stole weapons, including semi-automatic rifles, handguns, grenades, and military uniforms. The bombing campaigns continued through 1965 to 1967, where they killed about 3 people. They targeted also the consuls of the United States in Montreal. That's a diplomatic mission. They also targeted the mayor of Montreal, a Liberal Party campaign event, and the Montreal Stock Exchange. The bombing campaigns were punctuated every once in a while by arrests, and many of the FLQ terrorists were convicted and thrown in jail. They agitated for the release of what they called political prisoners. However, these were people that were tried and convicted under criminal law. In 1970, they began by bombing the National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa, and then in October, the FLQ kidnapped 2 men. The man on the left is James Cross. He was a British diplomat stationed in Montreal, and the man on the right was Pierre Laporte. He was the Minister of Labour in the Quebec government. They kidnapped these men and held them for ransom, and their demands were the release of the other prisoners, the FLQ prisoners that had been previously convicted. The provincial government asked the federal government to send in the army. So we had a situation where the Canadian military was deployed to patrol the streets of Montreal, Quebec City, and Ottawa, and thus to free up the police to investigate and try to find Cross and Laporte. FLQ also wanted their manifesto read on air. One of this demand was actually met, and the Radio-Canada, the French CBC, actually read their manifesto. They were inspired by Karl Marx and communism, and they essentially wanted a new society to be created in Quebec, one that was separate. Now, the Prime Minister at the time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was very against giving into any of the demands of the FLQ. He gave a very famous interview to a CBC reporter on the steps of Parliament Hill.
In the kind of society that you live in.
There's a lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed, but it's more important to keep law and order in this society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a soldier.
At any cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
Now, following the deployment of the army, the government of Quebec and the federal government declared that there was a situation of apprehended insurrection. That is, that they feared that a revolution was about to happen, and the government brought in the War Measures Act. Now, the War Measures Act didn't just send the military out on the streets. The War Measures Act was essentially martial law. Civil liberties were suspended. So police could search houses without warrant, people could be arrested and held without charge, and the fear was that the Canadian state or the Canadian government was at threat of a mass disruption. Now, when the War Measures Act was declared, it was very controversial. Some people argue that it shouldn't have been brought in, that it was an overreaction. Others argued that the threat of the FLQ was real, and the government, acting on the best information that it had at the time, made the right decision. It was very popular. Trudeau's popularity spiked after the enactment of the War Measures Act. He was seen as a strong leader who stood up to a gang of thugs and terrorists. Trudeau went on television and announced the War Measures Act.
If a democratic society is to continue to exist, it must be able to root out the cancer of an armed revolutionary movement that is bent on destroying the very basis of our freedoms. For that reason, the government, following an analysis of the facts, including the requests of the Government of Quebec and of the City of Montreal for urgent action, decided to proclaim the War Measures Act. It did so at 4 a.m. this morning in order to permit the full weight of government to be brought quickly to bear on all those persons advocating or practicing violence as a means of achieving political ends. The War Measures Act gives sweeping powers to the government. It also suspends the operation of the Canadian Bill of Rights.
But the consequences of it were long-lasting. Trudeau, perhaps ironically, is the one that brought in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982. The FLQ was crushed. Its members were arrested. However, Pierre Laporte was murdered in the hands of the FLQ, but thankfully James Cross was freed. Thank you for watching. So we wanted to consider the following essential question. What was the relationship between the interest groups, the FLQ, and the state?